and gentlemen, welcome to another Wiggity Wyatt's World production. I'm never saying that again. I don't know why I just did that. Anyway, welcome back to another video where my dad is going to tell you guys an NFL player that he thinks of first when he thinks of every NFL team. This is a video that he just texted me saying he had an idea for, and I'm like, yeah, it sounds great. I'm actually game for pretty much any idea my dad has, except for the ones where he wants to show you guys his coin collection. I don't know about that one, but this one sounded great. So a couple of plugs as always. Don't forget to use code WyattzWorld on G Fuel, Waggle, or Prize Picks. By using my codes on G Fuel or Waggle, you'll save a discount on any of their products, and by using it at sign up on Prize Picks, you're gonna guarantee yourself to win a free $50 with your first $5 entry. But please always remember to play responsibly, and let's get into the video.
Hello, Wyatt's World junkies. It's Wyatt's dad, or as some of you call me, the Fossil, back with another video. Hey, I talked to Wyatt about doing a video where I just ran through the 32 teams and mentioned a player that came to mind. Doesn't necessarily the best player that I believe is on the team, but it's the player that I think of when I think of those individual teams. So we'll start with the NFC East. NFC East featuring the Dallas Cowboys. Whenever I think of the Cowboys, I always think of Ed Too Tall Jones. He was a 6'9" defensive end that played with the Cowboys during their heyday. Ed Jones was an exceptional defensive end, but the interesting thing about him was he quit. It was the year I graduated, so back in 1979, remember I'm a fossil. Ed quit football for a year and went into boxing, and I think when he was younger, he was a Golden Glover or had some experience with it and just always wanted to box, so he went and boxed heavyweight. 6 matches. I don't think he was beaten, but after that, he had enough of it and then went back to play football. I guess football was easier than boxing. But Ed Jones. Then we'll go to the Philadelphia Eagles. When I think of the Eagles, I think of Harold Carmichael, the 6'8" wide receiver they had when I was a kid. He was one of the top receivers in the league, and he made his game by catching passes over shorter DBs, being 6'9" or 6'8" and with that big reach. The New York Giants. I think of the Giants, I think of Lawrence Taylor. Taylor was the gold standard for linebackers. I think he was he was the league MVP, as a matter of fact. And here's some trivia for you. Who is the only other defensive MVP in the National Football League? If you're wearing a Vikings jersey like I am, or shirt, you probably know the answer is Alan Page. So the other team in that division, Washington Commanders. Multiple players that I could say, but I'm going to pick a guy named Sonny Jurgensen. When I was a kid, he was a backup. Announcers, I remember an announcer calling him the old potbelly stove is going to warm things up. The quarterback for the time at the time was Billy Kilmer, and they'd bring in Sonny Jurgensen, and he would save the day. So he was kind of he was a great quarterback for many years, a lot of years before I even started watching football. But the interesting thing about Sonny Jurgensen, Sonny is not his given name. His given name is Christian Adolf, which is quite a pair of names, and that's why he didn't go by Christian Adolf, I don't think. They called him Sonny Jurgensen. But the interesting thing about him was he is in the Ring of Honor, I'm pretty sure of this, with the Philadelphia Eagles and with the Washington Redskins, which is kind of unique, a player in the Ring of Honor for 2 different teams in the same divisions. So now we'll talk about the NFC North. Start with the Minnesota Vikings. The guy that comes to mind is John Randall. John Randall was a high-energy defensive tackle for the Vikings for many years. I think he led the Vikings in tackles like 9-10 years that he played there. For a defensive tackle to lead a team in tackles is incredible. He was undrafted, free agent, and made the Hall of Fame. So John Randall. Chicago Bears. When I think about the Bears, I always think of Walter Payton. Sweetness, as he was called back then. I probably think about him because he ran all over the Vikings. I think he had two teams that he ran for 25 times. He ran for over 100 yards against. Of course, one of them was the Vikings, and the other was the Green Bay Packers. The only good thing about it was I think he averaged over 100 yards against the Packers, and we held him just under 100 yards. Tremendous running back for the Chicago Bears. Their greatest player in my mind. Then you go to the Green Bay Packers. I think of Gilbert Brown because it pissed me off. We drafted the guy 3rd round. So happy because the guy was massive. He's 6'2", 330, 340, and it was great to have a guy that wasn't going to be able to move in there. So the Vikings, in their infinite wisdom, were going to try and sneak him out and bring him through back through waivers. Green Bay took advantage of that, and they picked him up, and he was a Pro Bowl player, nose tackle for him for many years. They used to call him the grave digger. I think he'd make a play, and then he'd go like this. But it's been years since he's been on the field, but he was a great player. I think he still resides in Green Bay, probably got a bunch of businesses there or something. Maybe he's got restaurants, because he was a big fellow. The other guy would be in the Detroit Lions, and that's an easy easy one. Barry Sanders, I've talked about him before. I mean, he's the greatest running back in the history of the NFL. Probably would have been the all-time leading running back if he hadn't retired early. He got out early. I don't know if he was 30 or 31, but I think he played 10 years and had 1,000 yards or more every year, was a Pro Bowler every year. Most devastating, knee-bending running back ever. And so that covers the NFC North. And we'll talk about the NFC South. NFC South, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think of Mike Allstott, who was a fullback for them, played at the same time I think as Warwick Dunn did. But Allstott was a Larry Zonka, who I'll talk about later, type hammer, tremendous runner. You know, that was back when the fullbacks actually gained a lot of yards, and he was one of the guys that did. I don't know what he had in his career, probably had 7,000 yards. I'll take a shot at it. You'll correct me, I'm sure. And then the New Orleans Saints, I always think of Archie Manning. He didn't have a great career with the Saints. The Saints were not a very good team. He was a good quarterback on a bad team. I think they won 130, 140 games during his career there. He did play for a couple other teams, but his stats are similar to that of, proportionally anyway, Joe Namath, but Archie didn't make the Hall of Fame, and Joe Namath did. I want to retch when I talk about that, but I'll get him later too. Also in the division is Carolina. I think of a guy named Chris Wanke, who was a quarterback for him. The only reason I think of him is because he was from Minnesota. I went to a game in the Metrodome at the time, first game of the year, and Chris Wanke was a quarterback for the Panthers against the Vikings, and ended up beating the Vikings. And he was looking like the second coming of Christ. Unfortunately, that was the only game they won that year. They were 1-15. I think he won maybe 2 games, and he was out of football. But he had to beat the Vikings, of course. I think he does some college coaching now, but he was gone. You know, I'll also mention one other guy. I don't know if any of you remember this. I remember it because I did a fantasy football at work, and I used this guy's name. Real name was Rod Smart, I believe. And he came from the XFL. And when he was in the XFL, he had taken a name, and it was on his jersey. There's jerseys out there with it on it. But his name was He Hate Me. You can look it up. So I called my fantasy football team He Hate Me. Anyway, the other team would be the Atlanta Falcons, and they had a player named Tommy Nobis, number 60. I remember him because when I started watching the NFL, whenever we played the Falcons, he was the one player they had. He was a tackling machine. He came in when Atlanta did their expansion, so it would be back in 66 or 67. He was the first player that they ever selected. He had almost 300 tackles in a season, and when you're playing 14 games, that's over 20 tackles per game on average. He played for the Falcons for many years, and I was thinking Tommy Nobis with the Falcons. Now we'll go to the NFC West. NFC West, San Francisco, I think of Jerry Rice, the all-time leading receiver. Still, you know, Randy Moss and Jefferson, all these Vikings, yeah, Chris Carter. Carter's close with him. Jerry Rice was it. I mean, he was a smooth receiver. He had 1,000 yards, 13, 14 different seasons. The all-time leading pass receiver. You know, to have watched him when he was in his prime, you have to do that to appreciate him. Seattle Seahawks, another wide receiver, Steve Largent, played, you know, many years ago, of course. Largent led the league a couple times in receiving. He also, at the time, I remember watching it, every game he played, he'd have a catch, and he had the streak of the most games with a reception. But Steve Largent, great receiver with the Seahawks. Arizona, when I think of them, I think of Conrad Dobler, and I've mentioned him enough times, I won't go into it, the dirtiest man in football. When I think of the Los Angeles Rams, I think of Jack Youngblood. Youngblood was part of a defensive line back then that was tough. You had Youngblood, Fred Dreyer, who did a series called The Hunter. It was a detective series. Tackles were Larry Brooks and Merlin Olsen, who also was an actor with Little House on the Prairie. But anyway, Jack Youngblood was tremendous defensive end. Hated to play the guy. Talk about tough players. He was tough. He played 2 games in the playoffs. One, I think he broke it, and the other one he played in it. With a broken or fractured tibula. Think about that. He played, the man took that kind of pain and continued to play. Tremendous player. Now we'll look at the AFC. The AFC East, Miami Dolphins, like Larry Zonka, number 39, the running back. He used to cradle the ball like such when he went under. He was a 240-pound sledgehammer for Miami. I love to watch the guy because he was get 3-4 yards for sure every time, but you never knew he was going to break a play. Great running back. Another fullback, you know, back when the fullbacks were used to gain a lot of yardage. Zonka had a lot of yards in his career with Miami. New England, Sam Bam Cunningham. I don't know how many of you New England folks remember him. Running back in the mid-70s. Remind me of Chuck Foreman in that he could catch and run. He's a tremendous receiver as well. But I think of Wham Bam Cunningham. I don't think of the GOAT when I think of New England. I think of Sam Cunningham back then. His older brother was Randall Cunningham. I think was older. It was a brother anyway. Was a quarterback with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he had the 98 season with the Vikings that I'll never forget. With Buffalo, it's O.J. Simpson. He was the first running back that had over 2,000 yards. I think it was 2003 or something like that. But remember Simpson? Simpson was not a power back. He was a smooth, you know, he had the speed, the bursts of speed, but he was a smooth kind of finesse running back, and that speed allowed him basically to get away with murder on the field. Anyway, the other player I think of is Joe Namath from the Jets. And for the New York Jets, I think of Joe Namath. I only think of him because I just can't believe that they would allow him into the Hall of Fame with numbers where you threw 170 touchdowns and 230 or whatever interceptions and completed 50% of your passes for 27,000 yards. It should not be in the Hall of Fame. It still irks me. But the name I remember, though, out of the Jets, too, is Emerson Boozer. Does anybody remember him? I just like the name. He was a running back for him. Well, now we'll go to the AFC Central or North. Pittsburgh Steelers. Jack Lambert is the guy's name that comes to mind. I think he was a defensive rookie of the year, defensive player of the year a few times. Just a tough linebacker. He was with Jack Ham and Andy Russell, I think, was the other linebacker, at least for part of those 4 Super Bowls. Lambert was there for all 4 Super Bowls, and I think Jack Ham was too. But Lambert comes to mind with Pittsburgh. With Cincinnati, it's Ickey Woods. Does anybody remember Ickey Woods? He did the Ickey Shuffle. Him, and then Tim Crumry. And the only reason I always think of that name is because I was watching the game where he broke his leg and it's flopping around like this as he goes into the pile. Kind of hideous, but I'll never forget that play because it scarred me for life. Cleveland Browns, probably Bernie Kosar. He was a quarterback they had in the mid-late 80s. He actually made Cleveland relevant for quite a few years. They were in the playoffs, won some games. Unfortunately, I think Elway was in there with the Broncos at the time. Anyway, they couldn't get over the hurdle, but Kosar was a good quarterback for Cleveland for quite a few years. Baltimore, I think of Tony Saragusa, the Goose. Funny guy, great defensive tackle. Played alongside Sam Adams was the other guy's name, and he was bigger yet. He was like 6'4" and 350. I mean, you had 700 plus pounds of beef in there at tackles, and I think they allowed under 60 yards or around 60 yards a game rushing per season, or at least for a couple of those years. I mean, you're going to run against 2 guys that size. It's like Minnesota had the Williams Wall. For the AFC South, I don't have a lot of history on the Texans, for instance, but J.J. Watt comes to mind, the great defensive end that they had in Indianapolis. Andrew Luck, being their quarterback, comes to mind only because he walked out on him. I probably would think more of Peyton Manning, the great quarterback, won the Super Bowl with them, Oklahoma and all that, Archie's son. Peyton Manning would be the guy that comes to mind with them. With Tennessee used to be the Houston Oilers, so I'm going to go back and take Earl Campbell, a battering ram running back for Oilers, and so I'll put him under Tennessee. Unbelievable player to watch. I've talked about it before. There's some footage of him basically having his jersey ripped off as he breaks tackle after tackle. Probably pound for pound the toughest running back that I ever have seen, and that includes Derrick Henry and some of these other guys that run through people. And for Jacksonville, probably Maurice Jones-Drew, just because that's the only guy I could think of off the top of my head, at least right away with Jacksonville. And I see him now doing one of the NFL, I don't know, it's the NFL Network or whatever, but the guy was only like 5'6", but still ran for 8,000 or 9,000 yards in the NFL, and he looks like a bowling ball now, and back then he did too, but he's a great running back for Jacksonville. AFC West. Kansas City Chiefs. I probably think of Tony Gonzalez more than anybody else. Greatest tight end in the history of the NFL. Most yards for tight end. Smooth receiver. Played with Atlanta for a while, but I give Gonzalez had most of his successful years, I think, with Kansas City. Denver Broncos. I think Lyle Alzado. If you guys remember him or not, he was a defensive, I think it was a defensive end with the Broncos. He played with the Raiders too for a while, but the guy was an absolute maniac. I mean, he went out there to kill people almost. He was a great player for a lot of years, and he also, this is a little bit of trivia for you. He is, Ed Jones, Too Tall Jones, boxed as I mentioned earlier, but he actually boxed against Muhammad Ali. He didn't beat Ali, but I think Ali gave him credit for being, he was a decent fighter for not having any experience. But Lyle Alzado boxed Muhammad Ali, believe it or not, it's true. Let's see, San Diego Chargers, Louis Kelcher, defensive tackle. I think his number was 74. He was a 300-plus pounder, one of the first ones. Having said Louis Kelcher, the name that I always think of when I think of the San Diego Chargers is Dan Fouts. He threw for 4,800 yards before it was fashionable to throw that much. For the Oakland Raiders, with Oakland, I think of George Blanda. He was a kicker and a quarterback at the same time as a backup quarterback. Stabler was their quarterback, but he backed him up. And he was in, I remember him coming in some games. But he played until he was 48 years old. Good old number 16 running out there and kicking field goals. So that's a player. I believe I caught every team from every team. I wanted a couple comments for you guys. One, I got hammered for my J.J. McCarthy comparison to any quarterback in the league. Probably rightfully so, but you guys got to remember, I'm a Vikings fan. We picked this guy number 11. Yeah. It's insane to pick him over somebody that's played. Well, I'm not going to pick him over, a lot of those quarterbacks that haven't really achieved much when there's an opportunity for him. The other thing, look at the Vikings. They could have had Aaron Rodgers, the greatest quarterback of all time. I got a gag. But instead, they decided to stick with JJ. So, at the end of the year, maybe we'll replay that video and I can say ha-ha, or we can replay it and you guys can have the last laugh on me. I just hope he stays healthy enough to prove it one way or the other. And then I have a special treat for you WyattzWorld junkies. You always ask questions about Wyatt, and so Wyatt was always a clown. I told you he's always a clown. And this, I don't know how old he was when he did this, but this is up at my folks, and I'm going to try and, it's on my phone, a little bit smaller picture. That's the type of clown Wyatt was. Got the garden hose out at my folks. I had that picture up at his graduation. Everybody got a pretty good chuckle out of it. I saved it. I got a big blown up picture of it. Maybe if you're interested, let me know. Throw your names in a hat and have Wyatt sign it and send it to you. He probably going to say no to that, and he might even edit this so you don't see it. But anyway, a little bit more on Wyatt. If I find some interesting tidbits, if I do some more videos, I'll try and bring them up for you guys. So that's it for this video. I hope all you WyattzWorld junkies have a great day, and I will see you, the fossil, on the next video.